Greetings. This is the People-Centered Internet. We're delighted to have you with us for an edition where our featured guest is actually someone that we see on our calls on a fairly regular basis, Marc Prensky. And Marc is the person who coined the terms digital nomad, digital native,
Digital native.
and digital immigrant. Okay, I misspoke on the nomad piece. That's another person, but digital uh, immigrants and digital natives. That's Marc, and he is a serial author, and he has a new book that he's going to share with us today, Third Millennium Kids. Marc just got back from sharing his point of view in China, and we're delighted that he is here to share a little bit about his thinking about how this next generation is going to make contributions and make them earlier in life. So, Marc, delighted to have you with us. Jump in and we'll get to questions in about, you know, 20, 25 minutes if it's the way that you timed it out earlier. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here. I've been a long-term member of PCI and really appreciate this group. And the way I want to address you today is that most of you are parents or grandparents. I assume almost all of you are. If you're not, you probably have a young person, a nephew or niece that you care very much about. And what we all want to do is to prepare those kids for their future. And that's what my book is about, the future, the third millennium. But there are multiple issues that happen kind of all at the same time. First of all, many of us assume that it will be somewhat different, the future will be different, but not all that different. Not, it'll, our wisdom that we've accumulated over our lifetimes will be useful to the kids. And so, and we also want to hold on to our past culture. We want to hold on to our past in general. We want to hold on to our past wisdom. We want to pass those things on to our kids. And in a sense, we want our kids to be like us. A little better, of course, but essentially the same people, not very different, not aliens, but they're actually not going to be exactly like us. And the last thing is that the time frame that we use when we talk about this is mostly short term. It's mostly a couple of years, getting our kids to graduate, getting our kids a job, getting our kids out of school. So we're not thinking long term. It's the time that we'll be here. But I want to do something different. I want to take a 20-year time frame. That's what I do in my book. I want to talk about how things are going to be when these young people of today grow up and when they get to be either, if they're very young today, just looking for jobs and entering the job market, or in the middle of their working and productive lives. And that's going to be, in my view, extremely different. And the reason it's different, in my view, is that we are in the middle of a period of evolution. Humans are evolving. And when I say evolving, I don't mean biologically. That ended 100,000 years ago. I mean non-biologically. And humans, ever since we finished evolving biologically, have continued to evolve non-biologically. We invented language. We tamed fire. We tamed animals. We got agriculture. We got social organization and big empires. We invented morality. We invented science. And we got writing and print. Those were all non-biological evolutions. Humans were not the same after those things as they were before those things. And the most recent are the coming in our lifetimes of compute power, huge compute power, connection of everybody around the world with the internet, and now AI, which I like to refer to as the missing intelligence, MI, that we never had. And now we do. So, as a result of this evolution, what's happening is that the intellectual power of people, and young people in particular, is growing exponentially. And When I was a kid, we had no computers. The Almost all the kids today, or very many of the kids today, have in their pockets what we would have considered to be a supercomputer 20 years ago. But the interesting part for me is that in the next 20 years, what's going to happen is that that power is going to grow exponentially so that they will have in their pocket, or perhaps not in their pocket, perhaps in a chip in their heads, a billion or even a trillion times more compute power than we have today. So, in a sense, they're going to grow as they learn to use this, they're going to grow intellectually unbelievably in the next 20 years. But there's a problem because at the same time, we're not evolving quickly emotionally. In fact, emotionally, we're probably close to the same as we were 100,000 years ago. It's why we can learn from Shakespeare. It's why we can learn from Homer, because we're emotionally the same people. And I see that as becoming a huge problem. I call it the IE gap, the intellectual emotional gap. And that is widening and widening. And it makes it hard because of the emotions, which always get in our way. It makes it hard to utilize sometimes all this new intellectual power we have. And when I think about the emotional side, I think about it as having two sides, which we've known about for a long time. There's the good side, the better angels of our nature, which I call LEGO, LEGO, which stands for love, empathy, gratitude, optimism, all things we want in our young people and in all of us. And on the other side, there's the devils, which I call grab, greed, racism, abuse, belligerence, bullying. And we all have some of those, but some have much more, and they always get in our way. Right now, we have porn and gambling and things on the phone that we don't want. Those are all greed by people, and that's not a good thing that we have this. So we have not enough Lego and too much grab. And it's imperative that what we really need to do to prepare our kids is to correct this imbalance and then learn to use all this power that the young people will have and that we'll all have to use it in very positive ways. Now, what do we have today? We have education. We've evolved a system, and that system is now worldwide for preparing kids. That's called learning in advance, generally of a pre-established curriculum. And learning in advance was once great, but it's now outdated. And not only is it really outdated for the third millennium, but it's very, very deeply entrenched. And so it's very hard to change. The thing to remember is that it was once very useful. At a time when we didn't have much information that are available, we didn't have many teachers available, it was very useful to put kids in school and have them learn a bunch of stuff in advance. Plus, they couldn't do much else, so that was useful. The system supports a huge number of adults. Millions of adults are involved in education and in doing it the way we have done it for a long time. It keeps kids safe while their parents work. That's another big function we don't always talk about, but it's very important that as parents go off to work, they know their kids are somewhere safe and doing something hopefully constructive. And so this system of education used to prepare people reasonably well. Not all people went through it, not all people liked it or benefited from it, but it worked reasonably well at a time when things didn't change much. And so what we gave kids from the past was going to be useful in most likelihood for their future. But now the world has changed and changed dramatically. And therefore, what used to be useful is no longer useful. And we are starting to, and we have to, invent different things for young people to do as they grow up. So, what should those things be? That's what I've been thinking about, and that's what my book is a lot about. Most of what we do in learning in advance may be useful in individual pieces, but it's not useful for everybody. And putting everybody in the world through the same curriculum of learning to read and write, and then what I call the mess, math, English, science, social studies, that's not working anymore when we do it for everybody. So we have to change that and we have to individualize. What we really need are 2 billion curricula, a separate one for each person. But there are things that are useful for everybody. And most of those we don't do at all, or we do very little of. And that's what I wrote about in my book. I'm going to highlight 5 of those that I think are really important for the third millennium. The first is high enthusiasm. I call it hell yes, sign me up. We really don't have kids who, as they grow up, are enthusiastic about the preparation we're giving them. At best, kids tolerate school, most of them hate it, and they go through it because they have to and they're told they have to. And so we don't have an enthusiastic group of these young people where which we should because they have more energy than probably the rest of us put together. Along with that, number 2 is that we put too much stress on these young people. They are incredibly stressed out as a group. And I think most of the stress comes from us. It comes from adults. It comes from school. It comes from parents pushing kids to do well in school. Some of it comes from their peers and bullying and other things. Some of it comes from our telling them that the jobs of the future are disappearing and won't be there. Some of it comes from their seeing on their phones the wars in Middle East and Ukraine. So kids are very, very stressed out, and just ask any of them. And here's a great example. My son just graduated from Gunn High School, which is generally rated the #1 public high school in California academically. And it's a stress factory. Ask any kid who goes there, what is it like? It's full of stress to the point where not too long ago, a bunch of the students threw themselves under trains in our that pass through our community and killed themselves, committed suicide. And there was even one that happened just recently. Well, that's really awful. If we are putting so much stress on kids that we're driving them to suicide, and this happens in other countries as well, so you'd think we'd reduce the stress. Well, what did the school do? They did 2 things. They put guards at the crossing gates so that the kids couldn't throw themselves under the trains, and they provided counseling. And what was my son's reaction? Who in the world wants to open up to a counselor? Did they make the curriculum less stressful? Did they say take fewer AP classes or something like that? No, of course they didn't, because the parents wouldn't allow them to do that. So those are the first 2, and that's the motto of my book. Hell yes, low stress of what we need and don't do today. 3 more things. The third is high imagination, bringing the imagination out of kids' heads. And that's always been a difficult thing to do. We haven't focused on it, but even when we do focus on it, it's hard to get imagination out of kids' heads because in the past, getting it out fully, like you imagine it, required a lot of technique. If you were going to be a musician, you had to get chops. If you were going to be an artist, you had to get technique. If you were going to be a writer, you had to spend a lot of time building this technique before you could bring out the imagination in your head. So most of the imagination from the 100 billion humans that have ever lived stayed inside. It only came out when people were artists or creative, or they happened to want to build up all that technique. That has changed. That's changed because of generative AI. Now we have what I love that Kyle Shannon calls it lubrication. We have ways to bring out more imagination. And now, when we bring it out, we have ways to develop it without all the technique in advance. But the interesting part for me is it still starts with human imagination. And that's what's needed. And we need to be much better at helping young people bring it out. The fourth thing is self-knowledge. If you ask kids, many kids, what are your strengths? What are your passions? What are your concerns, your deep concerns? Many of them will say, I don't know. But they should know. They should know what they're concerned about. They should know what they're passionate about. They should know what their strengths are because that's what's going to help guide them as they make their choices in life. And then the final one that I think is really, really important is that young people don't make impact on the world. They don't do real world accomplishment. Now, there's a reason we didn't do that in the past because it was really hard to do. Young people didn't have information, they didn't have the tools, they couldn't do these things. But now we're in a very different place, and young people all around the world are making an impact and accomplishing. And I have databases of this, and I've written about all these examples in all these books. And when you talk to a parent, the first thing you'll hear is, oh, my kid did these unbelievable things. And so the young people know they have the sense that they can accomplish and that they can have impact, but we're not letting them do those things. So those five things, high enthusiasm, low stress, high imagination, strong self-knowledge, and real world accomplishment with impact are what the young people need. Now, before I summarize this in some slides, I want to talk about one other thing, which is the phones. Because the phones are a big deal, and we have a lot of people in today who are saying, take the phones away. Put them into yonder pouches while the kids are in class. Don't give kids cell phones or smartphones before the age of whatever, generally high school. And I totally disagree with that perspective. I understand that the kids are stressed. But I don't think it's the phones uniquely that are the cause of that stress or the cause of most of it. I think rather the phones are the kids' portal to their future. Now we have to learn to use the phones much better because right now the adults who have grab have been very exploitative about what goes on to those phones. And they've created porn and gambling and grabbing attention in ways that are not always the most positive. What we need to do instead of banning phones is we need to work with the young people to create things that really do take advantage of this wonderful new capability that's going to soon be a billion times more powerful in order to have a different and better world. And I'm going to show you in a minute an example of something that works like that. Before I do, let me show you some summary slides, and then I'm going to show you this new capability. So I'm going to share my screen. Uh, and this is just a resuming. I'm hoping I get the right one. It's not the right one. So this is going to take a minute. Excuse me. It was all set up and ready to go, but now it's not. Um, okay, there.
You'll get there.
There it is. I will certainly. Can you see the cover of my book now?
Well, we can see it on a layout that looks like it's in,
Yeah, that not
and
you.
it's not your charts yet, Mark.
No, it's a full screen picture of the cover of my
Nope,
book.
nope,
No,
it's
You
no.
not.
don't see that. Okay, well
We're
then we'll
seeing the
try
old.
again. Then we'll try again. Share. There it is. Now we
Looking
share.
There,
good.
there
Okay.
you go.
So that's what the book is, Third Millennium Kids. It will soon have a new cover, I think, because enough people have told me it should. Uh, and let me start with a quote. And that quote is that our kids, this really summarizes the book in my view. Our kids will live in a different world from ours. They don't need to be like us. They need to be like themselves and live in their times. And we often prevent them from doing that. How do I get to the next slide? there's a post-biological evolution that we're all going through, and I talked about that before. It's the compute power and connection in AI are a new evolutionary step for humankind, as were all the things that I describe in this slide. There's an IE gap coming, a very important gap between our intellectual growth and our emotional growth that we are going to have to find ways to deal with. And I'm optimistic that in the third millennium, we will find ways to change human nature in ways that we couldn't do before, and in ways that are not negative to anybody or any group, but that are positive, just as we eliminate diseases that we no longer want. I talked about Lego, getting more Lego, love, empathy, gratitude, optimism, and less grab, greed, racism, abuse, belligerence, and bullying. And when you look at it like that, you can really see how much grab has been a factor in many of the things that we try to do. I think that young people and all people are becoming symbiotic human hybrids. I don't think it's us against the AI. I think we are really one species that is now evolving. And I think that what the third millennium kids need are the 5 things that I described in the talk, so I'm not going to go through them again. A couple of quotes. This is Margaret Mead 50 years ago. I believe we're on the verge of developing a new kind of culture where it will be the child and not the parent and grandparent that represents what's to come. I think that's very much come to pass. I believe that smartphones are our young people's portal to the future, and taking them away is really a mistake. We have to learn to use them better. We've just gotten a new body part effectively. We've got to learn to use it, but not take it away, especially from the youngest kids. And finally, the antidote for stress and anxiety, which I acknowledge there's lots of today in our young people. The antidote is generating high enthusiasm, more imagination, better self-knowledge, and real-world impact from these kids. And it's not giving them more of the mess, the math, English, science, social studies, or taking their phones away. That's my perspective. I got one more that I want to go to. This is the cover of the book. But what I want to share with you now is something that I very recently discovered, and is a use of AI. There is a tool or a capability, I prefer to call them capabilities, called Notebook LM from Google. And here's what I did. I just heard about it last Friday, and then I started using it over the weekend. I went to the site, I uploaded the full text of this book, which took about 30 seconds. And then I pushed a single button, and that button said, create podcast. And listen to what came out.
So we're diving into Marc Prensky and Third Millennium Kids today.
Right.
You sent over some really fascinating excerpts from his work.
Yeah.
And honestly, some of it is like seriously mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
Like just imagine being born into a world where your phone isn't just a gadget, it's like an extension of your brain, right?
Right.
That's the reality Prensky is painting for these kids.
Yeah.
Which, I gotta say, it makes you wonder how we ever even like function without it.
It really does.
Right.
It's more than just having the phones though, right?
Right.
It's I mean, Prensky argues that this isn't just another like kids these days thing.
Yeah.
You know, this is like a full-on evolutionary leap, and it's all because technology is like exploding faster than that we can even keep track of.
Yeah.
And these kids aren't just using it, they're like merged with it, you know?
Yeah.
It's changing everything, how they think, how they talk to each other, how they see the world, like everything.
It's like we're trying to teach them how to use a compass and a map when they've got Google Maps, right? Like
Yeah.
in their.
And you don't just do this, not just one, you can do this infinite amount of times.
Ever get that feeling, you know, when a book just kind of rocks your world, changes how you see things?
Happens to the best of us. What have you been reading?
Third Millennium Kids by Marc Prensky. You actually recommended it, remember?
Oh, yeah, right. Big ideas in that one.
Huge. It's got me thinking about, like, young people and tech in a whole new way. Prensky, he doesn't just say kids today are different because they've got iPhones, right?
He goes way beyond that, doesn't he?
He argues it's like evolution, a new stage of human development, and it's all because of technology.
It's a bold statement, that's for sure. But that's Prensky for you, always challenging our assumptions.
Hmm.
Okay, so you get the picture. I'm going to stop sharing. Uh, the last part is that Kevin has always said with this group, the PCI group, which is a great group and full of ideas and full of energy and full of thoughtfulness, that it's worthwhile asking you for something. And so I have an ask. And the ask is, please read the book. It's available on Amazon, and I'd really love to know what you think of it. And if you like it, please post a review on Amazon. That's the first one. The second one is that I hope you will start to think of young people differently. Start to think of young people as having much more capabilities than they ever did in the past. Question your own assumptions about young people. And the third is that let's have a great dialogue about this stuff. So that's where we should go next.
All right, very good, Mark. Thanks for uh, unpacking a nice, tight 30-minute view of what the book is suggesting to us. I mean, there's certainly a lot more, having read the manuscript and draft, that you know, there's a lot of other things that you're recommending very specifically. So that's good. Um, I'm going to kick off our questions with this. If we're trying to look at unconventional ways, to get young people involved, right, at an earlier age in doing things that are practical, what do you think about retrieving the notion of apprenticeship? Meaning that a young person and a person who's currently practicing in some kind of profession, something that's actually in the world, um, rather than trying to mold the person into the role of here, young person, become like me, that there could be a different kind of apprenticeship that could be you know um, forged, right, where there's a little bit of both, and perhaps the reverse mentoring that takes place in large corporations today. What do you think about that?
I'm very much for it. I think that that's a tradition that got lost, that
Mhm.
what happened in the early days of humanity, what happened was that young people essentially apprenticed. They apprenticed to their parent. If your father was a baker, you probably became a baker.
Mhm.
If you went into the church, you apprenticed to those people, and you did it to get things done. And so
Mhm.
the business idea of this was always you do this stuff in order to accomplish. What
Mhm.
happened along the line is that some people said, no, 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 we need to think. And so they went off and they established universities and ivory towers. And all they did, they didn't accomplish anything. All they did was think and publish books. That's an accomplishment, perhaps. And so that tradition broke off from that other tradition that you describe as apprenticeship. And guess what? It captured, or I say hijacked, K to 12 education throughout the world. So that K to 12 education is not about accomplishing at all. It's about just learning in advance and thinking and ideas. So now people are bringing back this concept of apprenticeship, as you said, and I think that's a great idea. The problem with it that I've seen is that most of the things that people call apprenticeships, where
Mhm.
they let you go in and spend time in the company for a couple of whatever it is, weeks or months or whatever, they're not very effective. They're not very helpful. And the reason they're not very helpful is because of this idea that we have about young people that they can't do anything. So when you go into an apprenticeship, you may look around, you may see some things, you may learn a lot of things, but nobody's going to give you, or very rarely will they give you responsibility for a project on your own to say, let's do this. Maybe you'll fail, maybe you'll succeed. But so we need to reform the apprentice idea and what it means. If we do that well, I think it's a terrific idea, and that corporations or companies or organizations should be using young people as farm teams. They should be looking out, just doing what the sports teams do. Who are some good people, young people, even in elementary school, that we can bring in and shape so that they can actually accomplish useful things for our company. And the flip side of that is that every company, in my view, should have an officer whose job it is to look for the things that the company would like to accomplish, would really like to accomplish. It's on their list, but they don't have the resources to do. And it's interesting that the military does this. Sometimes the Navy will say, oh, I want to do all these things and I can only do my top 10. I'm going to farm out the rest to college kids. I'm going to farm out all those other things that are on my to-do list that I won't get to young people. And that's got a lot of advantages. The young people are often surprising in what they do. They come through in ways that are almost always unexpected. And I'd love to see a lot more of that.
All right, very good. I've asked Ben Kaczynski, who was making comments in chat, to join us. Ben?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a living example of that my family had a bakery, and I grew up working in the bakery at night. I was only trusted to wash and clean for a long time, and then graduated to fryer and fried donuts and so forth. I never was elevated to cakes, which was the pinnacle pinnacle responsibility. But my main point, and I'm speaking from the ivory tower, as Mark knows, is the problem is that we separated the ivory tower from the real world, and along that. Now, when I was growing up, we had shop, and yes, we gender biased had the girls go into home ec type things and that, but at least they were bridges to the real world experience and personal accomplishment. And I learned a lot from shop that persists. And so that apprenticeship doesn't have to be completely separate. And most of what we do as apprenticeship, we manifest as internships, and we bring people in almost begrudgingly into corporations and don't let them do anything serious. And we almost bring them in and say, do no harm, just sit there and shut up until the internship is over. And we give them menial tasks without an accomplishment or a sense of joining a team and personally accomplishing in that. So
I couldn't have said it better, Ben.
To the main principle is that we built the ivory tower from even the kids side of it, and separating it from the real world instead of engaging with it, and nor celebrating personal accomplishment. Your point about the kids nowadays, and of course I have 50 years in academia, and so I can say that far more kids, youth nowadays, will say, I don't know what I want to be. And at least in ages ago, they were wrong on choosing, I'm going to be a fireman, I'm going to be a policeman, or whatever that is. But we've lost that now, where they're wandering aimlessly. And I agree with the Tolkien that all who wander are not lost. It's just that we're not letting them find things that along the way that are personal accomplishments. And so that's why I celebrate your notion of personal achievements and singular accomplishments that they can celebrate as real world accomplishments, not toys.
Thank you.
Other than that, I have no opinion.
Thank you. And we share a lot of opinions, and I appreciate that. I distinguish and have for a long time between achievement and accomplishment. Achievement is something you do for yourself. You become the head of this, you climb the highest mountain, you do all these things, and it benefits essentially no one but you. An accomplishment, on the other hand, benefits somebody, at least one person, hopefully a lot, outside you. And this real world accomplishment is also referred to as impact. And that's what the kids say, young people say a lot that they would like to do. I want to make an impact. I want to change the world, hopefully positively. I want to do, and we, in the past, that was hard. In the past, it was the best that young people could do was possibly collect some money, right? So for a project. But now, in the third millennium, young people can really take action. One of my favorite examples that I don't have time to show here, but I can give you all the link, is to a group of 3-year-olds in Spain that were in a program, and the person in charge said, "Well, what's the problem that you guys want to fix?" And they said they thought for a while, and they came up with, we can't reach the trash bins on the poles outside because they're too high for us. And that was definitely a problem for them, obviously not for everybody. But so what they did, they went through a process where they literally redesigned trash bins that were lower. They used some technology, they did some by hand, they created these trash bins. They had their idea of where they should be. They went and met with the mayor of the town they were in, and they got her to agree to these lower trash bins. And they got put up first as a prototype and then around the city. And the last scene in this video is these 3-year-olds jumping up and down, celebrating these new trash bins they have. Well, here's the situation. If you learn when you're 3 that you can have a positive impact on the world, that when you see a problem or have a group you want to help or have a dream, that you can actually do something about it, if that's the lesson you learn, and then you have a growing up where you do that scores or even hundreds of times as you grow up, you will be a very different person at the end of that process than what we have now at the end of our 6 or 12 or 20 years of schooling.
Very good. Mike Nelson, I see you on camera. You want to join us and add some perspective on what you've heard today? You're on mute, sir.
I don't know if I'm the best person to talk about this. I do have a 27-year-old daughter who isn't quite in the age category. She definitely has been empowered by technology, but I think the thing I would raise, the reason I'm not quite as utopian as you are, and I am very much an optimist, cyber optimist, is the throughput problem. I totally agree that the intellect emotion gap is growing, but I think the other problem is we just haven't built the tools to function in a world where we're actually dealing with 5, 10, maybe even 50 times more information coming at us than when I was a grad student 30 years ago. So do you address that in the book? I mean, I taught at Georgetown about 10 years ago, and the kids I was teaching did not seem to have any magic tricks for
Well,
finding
yeah.
the creme de la creme, the 1% of the information they really should be reading. And instead, they were just picking up random things as they floated by in the flood of information that they were immersed in.
Well, we're very early in a process, and that's why I take a 20-year time horizon. And, when you think about the history of the world, the idea of one lifetime, ours, is very, very, very short. And when I was a kid, we had 2 billion people in the world. Now we have 4 times as many. So that's one of the huge changes, and therefore the world is much more competitive. In terms of the information, what you're talking about, I have never heard a young person talk about information overload. I've heard many old people talk about it, but what they have is an amount of information coming in, and that's normal for them. What we had was much less. So for us, having much more come in is overload. It's suddenly, how do we do this? Well, we don't necessarily have all the answers to how to deal with it yet. Of course we don't. Things are very young. Generative AI is 2 years old, less than 2 years old. So we are now learning how to adapt to a very new world. to a very new system that has much more people, that has much more information, and we will. Humans are very good at adapting, but it takes some time in order to figure out how to do this. And each generation will add something to this need, to what we need. I think that, but what we can do as the bridge generation between the old world and a very, very new, different world is that we can encourage them to invent. And that's why I say bring out their imagination and then let them instantiate their imagination. You know, with AI now, you can have an idea for an app, and 2 minutes later, you can have the app. So that's what it can do. And this is, you know, we're toddlers here. We're crawling at this stage. So this is going to be incredibly big. And it always starts out with exploitation. Everything new gets exploited, whether it's a new medium. I remember the first thing that when you could do animations on computers, the first thing they animated was dildos. And so right now we have phones and we have this horrible thing of online gambling that's really exploiting a lot of kids. And we're trying to exploit their attention, and we're trying to exploit them and giving all the porn and everything. We're going to get past that stage. That's an early stage. And this place where we're going to go is that the young people, with our help, will invent useful things to do. And that's why I showed that example of the podcasts, because that's an incredibly useful thing to do. To turn a book into a podcast with one button, wow! And it's something that we couldn't even dream of doing before. So as these new capabilities emerge, and take advantage of all this new information that's around that we can now analyze and that we can now put into all the programs that we have, I think things are going to change dramatically as we move into the third millennium.
Mark, I'm going to challenge you. I just I want to pull back to this fundamental issue.
And Brian is too. I can see his hand is up.
There's the information that we're dealing with. And you said that we could see 1 billion times more computing power in our pocket. That, to me, implies there's going to be a lot more information in a lot more forms available to a lot more people. And I do see 25-year-olds who are stressed with the amount of things they're expected to process. It's not just because there's so much more out there and because the literature is changing so fast. You know, they can't just go into a class and read a syllabus of 5 and 10 and 15-year-old classic books. I mean, they have to be reading newspaper articles on what happened last week at the and what new products came out and the like. Again, I'm dealing with a few data points, mostly my students at Georgetown and my daughter, and they aren't the young people, if by that you mean teenagers, but they certainly are seeing a flood, and they're also feeling that they have to be experts in 4 or 5 disciplines. They can't be just narrowly down. So give me some hope that we're going to have some tools that are going to give us more information. A button that turns a book into
Kevin,
a
did you want to
podcast.
say?
I was going to say, knowing Mike's daughter a little bit, and I spending some time with her for a long weekend on our retreat, she is not typical. Okay, so she's very thoughtful, well read, and so Mark, you know,
So
you're
I
I
have
want
talking
to
one data
about
address,
point.
having a lot more extraordinary people like Mike's daughter as opposed to, her, just being an outlier. That's what
well, I want to address, let me now, you just added, I want to say 3 things, and then I want to hear what Brian has to say. The first
You're going to
thing,
hear from Perry first because her hand was up first.
well, I will be glad to. So the first thing is that the single biggest thing that I hear from young people is that they are underestimated. That basically they say they don't ask us to do all the things that we really can do. And so my advice to people in general, and especially to teachers, is to say, surprise me.
Mhm.
So that's the second thing is speaks to the stress that you just talked about, Mike. And you talked about your students being stressed and having all these things that they had to do and things that they had to deal with. There's 2 kinds of stress. There's stress that comes from other people, from outside, like you put stress on them because you require them to do all these things as your teacher and you have a set of standards and all these things. That stress is not necessarily good. It's toxic in some sense. But what is good is the stress that you put on yourself when you want to accomplish a goal. So you say, I want to reach this goal. Oh God, I have to read 10 articles. I will. Elon Musk wants to learn about outer space. He reads every book that there is in outer space. When you're self-motivated, that's when you overcome this stuff. And the third thing that I would say is we are really evolving ways to deal with all this data, and it's producing a new science. So that I work with a company that's called Pattern Computing, and they what they do is they take this huge amounts of data, and like in medicine and places where we have enormous amounts of data, and they look for patterns. And instead of saying, I'm going to have a hypothesis and I'll check if it's true, they say, no, let's let the data tell us what's going on there if we analyze it properly. So I think in general, we're in a transition time. And there's no doubt that it's going to be transitions are painful. They always are painful for some. And whenever we've had a transition, if you go blind, you're in a transition. If you go deaf, you're in a transition, and eventually you learn to cope with this stuff. That's what humans are good at, and that's the optimism that I bring.
All right. Very good. Pari, your hand's up. Unmute. What do you got?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you very much. It's very, very interesting, this discussion. And I wish that I read your book so I could have better know what it is about and could better discuss it with you.
It's never too late, and we can have another conversation
That
after
would
you
be
do.
great. Yes. Some of the things I hear right now reminds me of teaching creativity, which is a discipline that I am sure a lot of you are familiar. It's changing the teaching from passive turning students to passive receivers to more of a creative thinkers. So, and I totally agree. As a cyber enthusiast myself, I do really believe that AI could help a lot in expanding imagination. However, when it comes to youth, I find this a bit troubling. I find American culture celebrates too much youth and put less emphasis on wisdom, reflection, and experiences of the old. And I hope that in this situation where we are empowering youth, we don't again emphasize that, because I think too much power given without experience, without reflection, without wisdom, could actually take us to some, perhaps it's not very constructive. So that's one area that I have a bit of reservation about. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't encourage, that's not what I'm arguing, that we shouldn't encourage the youth, but I think that relationship between those who have some experience and some wisdom and youth, empowered youth, is some sort of, I don't know how we are going to make that bridge. I think it's important. Also, I want to agree with Mike in terms of stress. I work with a lot of young people as interns and various forms, and too much choices, I think, creates stress in their lives. It's not necessarily from outside, but they themselves become a bit confused because there's too many choices around them. So these are some comments that I had, but as I said, I would have loved to read the book and have better insight on what is argued there. Thank you.
Please do. So, and thank you for those comments. It's very, I think the first point that you made speaks very much to the IE gap, to the intellectual emotional gap, because the place that wisdom is useful, that we have wisdom, that it's going to continue to be useful, is on the emotional side. That's why we read Shakespeare. That's why we read Homer. That's why those people had insights into human nature And human nature, up to this point, hasn't changed very much. It's on the intellectual side that we have less ability to guide young people because we have never experienced this explosion of capabilities that is now taking place and that we're just at the very beginning of. So there's an interesting play between guiding young people intellectually and guiding them emotionally that I think is really going to be a salient feature of the at least the early third millennium.
Mm.
As to the number of choices, yeah, there's paralysis by having too many choices that exists, but not if the choices come from you. And so the second piece of that is the self-knowledge. And it's really the focusing on what do I really care about? There may be a lot of choices out there, and there are. We can do infinite numbers of things. But who you become as a person is really a reflection of the choices you make and the projects that you choose to do. When you're old, what we're going to remember about you is the projects that you chose to do and that you did successfully. So I don't really agree that the number of choices has to be paralysis. I think that we limit too much. So when you meet a young person, for example, the typical question an adult asks is not, what do you like? To which the answer is infinite number of answers. It's what's your favorite subject in school? Okay, that's a five choice, multiple choice question. And I think that there's more of a problem in not opening up the young people's choices than there is in having too much.
Brian Donahue, join us.
Okay, I have a couple of comments and then I have my normal challenge to Mark. Okay, let's do just FYI on August 24th, the United States Surgeon General has published a extensive
I
report.
read cover to
Okay,
cover.
well, let me just share it with
Well, what
everybody.
is it? Okay, so we
It's
don't know
about
what you guys are talking about yet.
isolation and the dangers that are present in the our country as people isolate. And part of that, of course, is from technology. Also, a section on parenting and the difficulties of parenting. Okay, now my next comment is to give real life. I'll just tell you. Yesterday, I had two graduate students, both recent graduates, who are interning for our startup. I have another intern at 12 o'clock right after this meeting. Um, and on the subject of recognition, the reason why we call ourselves the Enterprise is that we copy everything from the original Star Trek. So since these two students recently graduated from the I school in data science, they got promoted from intern to lieutenant. Okay. So yes, recognition. Now to my challenge.
Hold, are they wearing red, okay, shirts? Are they going to die in this episode? Okay, I
You
just
know,
want to make sure.
is
Okay.
Ben's still in here? Yes, at least the red shirts, boys and girls, are the engineering department. Yes, they make up the engineering department.
They die first.
No, all engineers, you guys are talking about the wrong movie. You're talking about
No, we're not. That's Star Trek.
I
Okay,
need
they
more
always get the
power,
red shirts
Scotty. I
also
need
got
more
killed.
power.
But the joke was
okay.
Galaxy Quest. You're talking about Galaxy Quest and
Well, they just
crewman
emphasize,
number six. Okay, can I get to my challenge?
yeah, you can.
Okay. So, Mark, I think I would disagree on the subject and challenge. It's not intellect versus emotion to me. It's power. I agree with your point. The availability of power. Um, but the reality that I don't want to rain on everybody's parade, but I believe God made us human beings and we have these fundamental defects. And you mentioned it, Mark, on the dark angels of the good and versus angels of the bad. Also a historian. I can't get over. I watch Netflix and everything from Alexander the Great to the Romans to the A bombs. I mean, human nature repeats itself. And who said, if you don't study history, you are condemned to repeat it? So, what's going to slow us down is selfishness, misuse, misinformation, disinformation. I hate to rain on everybody's parade, but that's the way I see it.
And I agree. And I agree. And whoever thought that we would agree, Brian, but I do. And
Amazing.
and that's what I mean by grab. When I talk about Lego and grab, that love, empathy, gratitude, optimism is the great side of human nature. Greed, racism, abuse, belligerence, and bullying is the difficult side of human nature. And whether you believe it came from God or anywhere else, that has been up to this point something that we could never change. That human nature, and it's a huge saying, you can't change human nature. Well, we have to, and we're going to have to. And the reason we're going to have to is because it so often gets in our way, as you just described. And that you can look at that's what you see when you look back at history. For my money, the World Trade Center, the planes flying into the World Trade Center was the Trojan horse all over again. It was a rich place that let its guard down and they came in. So yes, it does, but it's human nature, and particularly that bad side of human nature that keeps interfering. So
Mm-hmm.
I in the book I speculate. First of all, we have to acknowledge that because it's true, and the second thing is I speculate as to whether in the third millennium, when we now have CRISPR, we now have ways to do things, we now have ways to genetically fix diseases, we now have ways to do this, whether we will find ways, and I hope we will, to alter human nature in positive ways that are not like the things that we did in the past. We don't have to kill off groups, we don't have to hurt people, but if gradually we learn, and who wouldn't want this, to say, okay, we're going to get less of the grab. We're going to reduce that grab. We're going to reduce that negative side and really emphasize the love, empathy, gratitude, optimism sides that we all call the better angels of our nature. If we can do that, we should. And I think one of the things that I speculate in the book, and this is pure speculation, that we will be able to, because we're in a time period where the capabilities are coming into our hands.
All right. Now we're at the bottom of the hour. I want to remind everyone that this is the end of, our formal section for our PCI call, but we go into overtime. All right. Mark, you willing to stay with us for another half an hour or so?
You got me.
Great. I might suggest before this is all over that you actually put a link into the chat of how to get your book.
Absolutely.
And what your 3 asks were in addition to buy and read my book.
Okay.
So that's a good thing. And we are now in overtime. Brian, you have a follow-up.
I just for Ben's appreciation, a little humor. We in the Enterprise are still fighting the Klingons. Do you know why we're fighting the Klingons? Because they cling on to the past. Woo.
Woo.
There you go.
Woo.
I don't know
You get
whether
it,
that
Ben?
wasn't
Do you
built
get it?
into Gene Roddenberry's universe, that he created the name, right, to mean that. I don't know. So it would be good
I don't know
because
either.
they were very traditional, right?
Where is this?
All right.
Well,
Interesting.
we got, we believe around here. We
There you
believe.
go. I see it. All right.
I'm just looking. I'm looking here for the URL for my book.
Well, you go ahead and jump in.
Let me.
Ben?
I had one computer science professor, a fairly famous fellow, Edgar Dijkstra, was as well known in the computer science field. He was a cantankerous guy, but in class he made a statement that echoes episodically, and that is, we have debugging tools because we have bugging tools. And so in some sense we spend our time trying to solve problems that we had created. And so I wonder too, instead of waiting for youth to manifest the grab that we need grab prevention and not have to rely on debugging, but make sure we prevent bugs from being introduced into the systems via our processes. And a lot of that has to do with, I look at groups like Finland, for example, and educating their children who acclimatize to the net, the internet, to social networks early on to get them attuned to embed themselves into those networks with a healthy skepticism. They're not trying to layer a new technology on an old culture. They're trying to allow people to evolve a new culture and evolve a culture that they help design, because we have too much of the adult world trying to uh, build in these debugging tools that overreact and underserve the evolution of the individual.
Yeah, good
Mark,
point.
did you
Good point.
find the link?
I did. It's in the chat now.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you for filling the time.
Ben, would you do me a favor and just host for a moment? I have something that I need to do for my spouse. I'll be right back.
Yeah, please go on ahead.
At least you got that
So
one right, Kevin. You got that one.
it does. So let me go. Let's go back to what you said before, Brian, about the Surgeon General. And I read that report, and he's not wrong that these things are there. That there's a lot of anxiety in the world. He's not wrong that there's loneliness in the world, and many of us feel that. But the question, the place where I disagree with him, is that it's caused by the cell phones. And one of the most interesting things is that the technology, and we experiencing this right now, the technology can bring us together in ways that were never before possible. I talk to people from all over the world every week, all the time, in ways that I could never possibly
Oh,
have
yeah,
done.
I totally,
And
totally,
and
yeah.
and kids in school, they go to school and they learn about Palestine. Nobody tells them, hey, you could actually be communicating with kids from Palestine or kids from Israel, and your phone connects to those kids. Let's get them online. Let's do this kind of stuff. We are just learning that there's a whole set of capabilities that we have. Now, in terms of the loneliness thing, it's sad. It really is sad. And, we've all been lonely and we all have felt it. And it's very sad that at the time when all these connections are coming that didn't exist in the past, we still have this disconnect. And plenty of people have talked about it, Sherry Turkle, Alone Together, all that kind of stuff. And we have to find ways around that. And because the way I look at it is that suddenly we got a new tail. We got a new body part. This is something that we invented it, but here it is. It's in our pockets. It's in all our pockets. We have a device that will not only do analysis, but will connect us to everybody on the planet if we wanted to. And we just have not figured out what to do with that tail. And so at some point we're going to learn, oh, hey, it helps us hang from trees. Hey, it helps us, get flies off our body. Hey, it helps us do all these things. We're just in that very early discovery period for what this new, and that's why I call it an evolution. We are now different people because we have this capability
Yeah.
in our pockets. And
Now,
so
let me get, if you want, if I may, Mark, just real
you may.
quickly, the government sprints that I'm involved with for it's a 15-week sprint, and I did one last summer. Not my company, my group. Um, Basically, the federal government is trying to figure out what constitutes well-being. And I think you have to step up above. Well, I raised my hand. You have to step up above the question of what technology to say, do you have balance? So, Mark, are you balanced multi emotionally and mental? Are you balanced in your physical life? Are you balanced in your environmental life? Are you balanced in your spiritual safety life? Are you, Mark, balanced in your social life? And how does technology help people reach that
That's
rather than
yeah.
and so if we gotta have a flag to go after.
So
That's
I
what we're doing.
agreed. And I just wrote a foreword for a book that's about to come out, I think September 25th, that's called Digital Well-Being. And so the thesis of that book, and it's a really interesting book by a very smart person that I like a lot named Caitlin Krauss.
Whoop.
It's the theory, the idea is that for me, I always hated the idea of kind of well-being. I thought, well, who wants sick being, right? We all want well-being. But what she showed me is that one of the things that well-being is, maybe not the only thing, is that there is a higher plane that you can go live on, and that is separate from the mundane, and that you people reach it in many ways. They reach it through religion, they reach it through drugs, they reach it through a lot of ways. And her thesis is that you can reach it through the digital tools that we are now getting.
Oh,
And
now that's intriguing.
that's very intriguing, and
Hmm.
I wrote about this, and I hope you'll read it and to see about that, and that through VR, through AR, through all these new things, and she's a designer of these experiences, that you can actually get to the plane that we all want to get to. Nobody disagrees that we all want to be like the yogi and like all the people who say they've gotten there. Everybody loves it. Even what's his name was writing about this. Who's our guy who used to run the science center, who's in our group, and at least one of our groups. I can't remember his name, but a very, very, very smart guy who had his awakening at some point. He was a scientist, but he had his spiritual awakening. And we all use different names for this kind of thing. But the idea that the technology can actually help us get to and stay on that higher plane is a very interesting idea that I thought enough of to write the forward.
Well, I think it's pretty, we heard the term invoked probably about 20 minutes ago that you can't change human nature. I think it's pretty evident that we have changed certain kinds of human behavior and redirected attention, right, through, the technology that has been, introduced. And so, the whether you think that is a good reallocation of attention or not, what you're now suggesting is that you can be intentional about trying to, use your attention in ways that are going to bring value to you as opposed to the owner of the medium. All right.
We,
And
you
so
know,
that's that's a differentiation. And we're beginning to see that there are, specific either, governmental or regulatory agency things about, how do I use your data, right? And then there is the next, should you be the owner of your data? And how is that going to get used? And what does that do, in terms of your attention? I think that we're on the threshold of asking those questions and potentially getting to using, this tech in a way that at an individual level that we feel like we're getting better, right? And then that would get to your, the term well-being being manifest in a positive, right, way and having some actual meaning, in my
And
we
opinion.
have,
And
we,
if I can just respond to that, sorry, that I very much agree. We are moving, and we're moving into a very new era because we have all this compute power, because we have
Mhm.
all these things, and that we are recalibrating. We are totally recalibrating, and
Mhm.
we're in a situation where the same people who say I have a short attention span sit through a 2 hour movie or do something or play a
Mhm.
game for hours and hours and hours. So attention is something we don't fully understand yet, and the and being intentional about this stuff, as you say, and I like that, is something that we have to learn to do in but to do it in the context of a very different world.
I think that Csikszentmihalyi, all right, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote the books on flow psychology,
Yeah.
has a lot to say about how we allocate intention and go into flow state where time essentially disappears. And I think that, we need to understand, whether we're inducing ourselves into flow states that are, useful to us, or whether they are flow states where we're basically tossing our attention away in ways that are unintentionally not useful.
Yeah, and there's lots of,
We've
and interestingly
thank you
enough, that
guys.
Caitlin in her
What's
book,
that, Ben?
Ben, I'm going to let you talk in a second. But Ben in her book, Caitlin in her book, Digital Well-Being, talks a lot about flow and a lot about those things, because that's a piece of being on the higher plane. Ben, please.
No, I'm less homo chauvinist than you guys, focusing on the humanity. First of all, if I zoom out and you say that humanity has spent aeons in a very narrow reality and universe, and that has been based on physical, based on needs, uh, based on atoms. We, with technology, have unleashed a parallel universes that are able to augment and be extractions and isolations from that reality. I am AIOG, but also some people know I am virtual world OG as well.
Ben,
And
sorry, what's OG mean? What,
Old
AIOG, what's
guard,
that?
old
What?
guard,
What?
old
oh,
guard, old
What?
guard,
old gangsta,
Oh,
old.
old guard, OLD guard. Okay.
old
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
gangsta.
you know what, Ben? Uh, I have not heard the definition. Old gangster that sounds a little bit more
You're
rap.
not
Well, he's from
street.
Chicago, boys. Remember, he's the
Okay, that's
Chicago line.
fine. All
South
You're
right.
not.
Chicago.
You're not street, Kevin.
I am not, absolutely not. Okay.
But my
Make
point
your
is
point.
that
What's the point there, Ben? Yeah, what's your point? You're old
the
guard. What
point
does that
is
mean?
I have worked with disabled people going into virtual worlds. I've worked with people who could not walk, that could dance, that could not talk, and could act and interact in virtual worlds. That they are able to create and shape a reality that is different from the reality they're facing, not just coping with a reality and tolerating and adjusting to a reality, but they are able to transform and operate within a reality. So my main point is that it's happening everywhere. Our industry, any finance student that is not studying and focusing on digital assets is inane, because they're focusing on the old world in most of their studies. Accounting, we have people that are still studying to be CPAs in a world where auditing becomes a continuous audit rather than an episodic annual audit. And so all these worlds are being transformed, and we're trying to muddle in this. And even with the humanity, you got 8 billion people on the earth, but I've got 80 billion things that are connectable and becoming engaged.
Yeah. And by the way, the Financial Accounting Standards Board in Norwalk, Connecticut, that writes the rules, right, and sets them for everybody else, has no idea how to actually account for the intangibles in our economy, right? Because accounting was never designed for that. And so it struggles, when it starts to, how do I get a current valuation on, my intellectual property and my brand value and the experiences I'm delivering and blah, they don't know. All right. They don't know how to do that. And it's a big part of the economy now, right? It's
Well,
count inventory. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, it's code.
So, yeah.
digital
I want to
assets
share,
bring
I want to
digital
interrupt you.
assets by nature? No, bring
I know.
abundance.
Since it's
And
my
abundance
show
I
is
know.
not
today,
valued.
since it's my show today, I want
Mark
to
is
interrupt
losing
and
Go
control.
ahead, Mark. Jump
I'll
in.
just to
yield,
show
Mark.
you
I'll
this
yield to you.
cartoon that came out today. And
Everything we've ever heard of. So, yeah.
We are really ignorant, is the point.
Well, can I just interrupt? Kevin, I will send you the video of a Stanford SRI meeting last Friday
Mm-hmm.
that had the great experts that said AI is not controlled. There's no policy. Nobody knows how to govern it. It's completely out of control. Thank you very much. So I'll send that to you. And if you want, you can send it out to the members with all these optimists running around like Mark. But
Ah,
I'm from Newark, New Jersey. I'm more of a pessimist about.
I'm from across the river in New York
No,
City, so
I'm a
that's why.
both and person. All right.
Oh,
So
Chicago and New York.
no, I think that it's technology that both needs to be free and regulated in certain ways, because it's functionally becoming it's going to become a utility. All right. And
Yeah.
if it's a utility and you want to make it available to everybody, you have to have some guardrails on how decide to deploy it, use it, so on and so forth. If the only
Well,
place on the planet that right now that doesn't care a hoot about its data training set as a population is China. China doesn't care. They don't care about your privacy. So,
And
it's
so what this shows is that this is so dependent on the values that we have and what
that's
our
right.
goals are.
That's right.
And this is going to be there. It's going to be a part of us. It's something that we're not going back. It's invented. It's in there. And I think I see it as a part of humans. And if humans want to have one kind of society, they will do certain kinds of things and put certain kind of regulations in place and do this. If humans want to have a different kind of society, and you just cited China as some humans who might, they will do different kinds of things. And
Absolutely. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that we have to recognize that um, you know, some places will advance faster than others because there aren't any constraints of that typology.
yeah,
Um,
and some places might see that as a feature rather than a bug.
exactly right. That's
right. If
exactly
I
right.
can just make the most happy thing I heard at our meeting so far was, Ben, were you telling the story about Finland? Because that relates to Mark's book. If
Yeah.
if wise people who maybe have done it wrong before, if they step in to help young people get a healthy, balanced view of life as and technology as a what whoever just said that a utility, is that what you said, Kevin? It's a utility. Then I think I'm less concerned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that we're going to see varying levels of, you know, regulatory assertion depending on, as Mark was saying, what is it that you want as an outcome?
Yeah,
And how
well,
do you want to use it, all right, relative to the, your society and your commerce. All right. So there's a citizen view, and then there's a commercial business organization point of view. And at the moment, like, my family's originally from Oklahoma. We're dealing with the Sooners, okay, as opposed to, the boomer. We have people who are uh, in the market. It's an early game, and there's a lot of land grabbing going on right now in terms of, money that's flowing into it and trying to establish early positions. What? Yeah, I mean, we've been to this movie before.
But
The early
interestingly
web
enough,
was
oh, sorry.
exactly that. All right, get the
But interestingly
domain.
enough, that there are ways you can do that. You could do that out of love and gratitude and empathy and
Yes,
optimism, and you could do
yes.
that out of greed. And right now the greed comes in, and we're in a greed stage, as which is what you're really describing. And so the greed is, and what I think we want to do is not let that greed take over our kids' lives.
Yeah,
yeah, but
and again,
that you're Mark, you're such an optimist. You're killing me, buddy.
yeah, just remember that, you know, the motivations that are causing this to move so fast right now because of the massive influx of capital and attention, um, you know, can move in a number of different ways in terms of how do you choose to use it. All right. And so we have a gift, all right, in one way, which is, wow, this is moving really fast. Look at all the new capabilities that we have. But then you have to make some choices about how do you choose to use, all right, the gift that is in front of you. And
Yes.
you know, individuals, organizations, countries will make different, you know, lenses on what they want.
And that's the metaphor of the new tail. You know, you got a new tail? Do you use it to hang from trees or clean yourself, or do you use it to swat other people? And that's the intention and the choices that you have to make. Absolutely.
Well, just to
Yeah,
remind
I
you
thought
guys
you were,
too.
when you said tail, I thought you meant story, but you literally
No, no,
meant
I meant that a
an
Oh,
appendage.
physical
tail.
that AI is like a new
Kevin,
body part.
catch up,
It,
will you? I got
it's a,
the tail.
it's a new
Okay,
body part.
here's the thing. I just want to remind you guys what I'm spent the last 10 years doing is radically changing by life by bringing the social factors into decision making at all industries. The social factors, not just, yeah, that's so no problem.
All right.
I've been at it for 10 years. I plan to spend another 15 at it. And I
Okay.
do it full time. What the hell? Something to
But
do.
Mark, you know, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Why don't you give us a summary now of, you know, where we are and where you what recommendations you want to make as a result of having written this book. One, what changed for you based on your scholarship, right? Every time I write
yes.
something at this level, my perspective changes a little bit because of the deep dive. And then two is um, what is the key message that you want to for the adults who are listening, right, to take away? And three is how would you make PCI itself more youthful or a younger
Or
cohort
useful.
of participants? All right. That is something that we've actively talked about trying to do. So please jump in and give us your thoughts in those three areas, please.
Thank you. I will try to do so. The first thing, what I've learned, I think I would summarize it in that I've learned both from talking to the young people, which I do a lot and I try to do everywhere I can. I've learned that they feel incredibly undervalued and underappreciated, and that they feel they can do and contribute a whole lot more than they're ever asked to do. And in fact, they're actively interfered with to be told to spend their time doing other things like learning the mess that they don't want to do. And at the same time, I talk to parents who invariably, if they have young kids, say to me, "Let me tell you what my kid did the other day. Let me he
I
it
got it.
blew me
I'll be right
away.
back.
They can do all these things." So those that led me to believe that we're entering into a new period. And when I thought about it and looked at it, I think that the new period that we're entering into is to a great extent a, a result of the new technologies that are being developed and the new power that's coming to young people that we have not yet figured out how to use in positive ways completely, or maybe hardly at all. So the second thing is, what can adults do? And the what I think that adults can do is look at young people differently. And the way adults have looked at young people in the past is mostly little us's. We knew who the kids were because we were once there. We knew we were crazy. We knew we were this. We knew we were, and some of that is still true, or maybe all of it is still true emotionally as we grow up in the stages and who we are as people. But it's not true anymore intellectually, and I'm happy to use Brian's terms for those things if he prefers. But the what the capabilities of young people, what they can do in the world, are so much greater now. And I collect all these stories of the 3-year-olds and of the 20-year-olds and of all these people in the world who are doing, young people who are literally impacting the world in very positive ways. And so my belief is that this can happen, that it can spread, that the need is for adults to be helping young people understand the power that they have and then harnessing it in ways that both they and we think are positive. And for the third answer, in terms of what PCI can do, I think that it's really important that the adults of today see ourselves as the bridge, see ourselves as that we want to facilitate the young people moving towards their new future and their new times. Not be the cop, not the person who says, don't go there, put away your phone, don't do this, and that brings them back to where we were, because where we were is not always as great as we think it was. And it instead really facilitates and says, and this is why what Ben talked about with the internships is so important. We have to restructure this stuff to give power to the young people. And that's a very hard thing for adults to, in my experience, to understand, that we can actually trust young people, that we can give them this power. And I know a few people, Esther Wojcicki is one of them, who trusted her kid. It's trust, respect, independence, collaboration, kindness. But I also know, I remember a review from a teacher who said, oh my God, you trust these young people. I don't. And that's too much the attitude that we have. We just don't trust them. If we trusted them, we would bring them in, we would give them responsibility, we would work with them and monitor them and see what they're doing and guide them. But it's really a huge amount of underestimation of what the young people are capable of that's standing in our way.
Well, Marc, thank you very much for being with us today, sharing Third Millennium Kids, your new book with us. And the link is in the chat. Thank you for providing that. And yeah, I'm coming away, thinking that there's, more that we can do to help, the generation that you're pointing to, or in the generations to come, to reach their fullest potential. I think that's your intention, and I think it's a good intention. With
Thank you.
that, thanks for being with
Yes.
us, and in
Thank you,
everything
gentlemen.
you do,
Very interesting.
be intentional. We'll be with you again soon. Cheers.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Marc.